In ancient Rome, a wedding didn't end with celebration. It ended with a ritual that still confuses historians. The bride was taken, not gently, but in a staged abduction. She resisted. The crowd watched, and no one stopped it, because it wasn't chaos, it was tradition, a performance meant to transform her from daughter into wife. And what happened after the doors closed remains one of Rome's most debated mysteries. In ancient Rome, marriage was never just personal. It was political. Families arranged unions to strengthen alliances, secure wealth, and maintain status. Love, if it came at all, was secondary. The bride, often very young, left behind everything she knew. Her home, her family, her identity, because marriage wasn't just a new chapter. It was a complete transformation. Roman weddings followed strict traditions. Every detail had meaning. The bride wore a flame-colored veil called the flammeum. Her hair was parted with a spear-like tool, symbolizing discipline and control. Even her clothing reflected her new role. But the ceremony itself was only the beginning, because what mattered most was the transition, the moment she left her old life behind. And that moment wasn't gentle. It was dramatic, deliberate, almost theatrical, because Romans believed that change, especially for women, needed to be enforced through ritual, not just accepted. And that's where things became unusual, because at the end of the wedding, the bride wasn't simply escorted to her new home. She was taken. As the ceremony ended, the atmosphere shifted. The bride stood surrounded by family, one last moment in her old world. Then suddenly, she was taken. Not violently, but forcefully enough to appear real. The groom or his companions would carry her away. Sometimes she struggled. Sometimes she cried out. But everyone knew. This was expected. This was tradition. Historians believe this ritual may have been inspired by older Roman myths, where women were taken to become wives. But over time, it became symbolic, a performance. The bride's resistance wasn't rebellion. It was required, because it showed she wasn't leaving willingly, that her transition into marriage was serious, irreversible. The crowd watched closely, not shocked, not concerned, because to them, this moment defined the marriage. It marked the breaking of old ties, and the beginning of new ones. Once she was taken, there was no going back. And as she was carried into her husband's home, another ritual waited, one even more mysterious. When the bride reached her new home, she didn't simply walk inside. She was carried over the threshold. This wasn't just a romantic gesture. It had meaning. Romans believed that stumbling at the entrance was a bad omen. So the groom lifted her, ensuring a smooth, controlled transition. But it also symbolized something deeper. She was not entering as herself. She was being brought in as someone new. Inside, the environment changed again. The public spectacle was over. Now came the private rituals, sacred, structured, watched sometimes by family or attendants. The bride was guided through specific actions. She touched fire and water, symbols of purification, of belonging, of transformation. Every step reinforced the same idea. Her old life was gone. This was her new reality. And then came the final stage, the part historians still debate. Because while some sources describe it simply, others suggest something far more controlled and ritualized. Something that wasn't entirely private. Something that blurred the line between tradition and intrusion. What happened next is where history becomes unclear. Some Roman sources suggest the couple was left alone, that the night was private, simple, but others hint at something different, something more structured, more observed. There are accounts suggesting that older women, experienced authoritative, were present, not to watch, but to guide, to ensure the ritual was completed properly. Because in Roman culture, marriage wasn't just emotional, it was functional, expected. The bride's role was defined, and this night marked the beginning of that role. Some historians believe the presence of others was symbolic, a way to ensure legitimacy, to confirm the union. Others argue it may have been more involved, more controlled than we fully understand today. But here's the truth. We don't know exactly what happened, and that's what makes it so fascinating. Because even with all the records, some parts of history remain hidden, unclear, debated, and this ritual, the final step of a Roman marriage, is one of them. Part 5. Why it still confuses historians. Final 300 words. The Romans documented much of their lives, laws, traditions, daily routines, and yet, this ritual remains uncertain. Why? Because not everything was written clearly. Some things were assumed, understood at the time, but lost to us now. Cultural context fades. The Romans documented much of their lives, laws, traditions, daily routines, and yet, this ritual remains uncertain. Why? Because not everything was written clearly. Some things were assumed, understood at the time, but lost to us now. Cultural context fades, meanings shift, and what once seemed normal now feels strange, even unsettling.